Hey friends, it's Mindy here today for Altenew, and today I'm excited to share one of my favorite tips for getting flawless die cuts every time. We're going to be putting this trick into action using the gorgeous Build a Garden Radiant Blooms set from Altenew. I'm going to walk you through how I stamp, align, ink blend, and die cut my images so everything turns out perfectly. This video is a part of my Inking It Up with Mindy series that you can find here on the Altenew channel once a month. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the Build a Garden Radiant Blossoms set. This has this beautiful cascading bouquet of flowers and also a basket along with some sentiments. You also have your inspiration sheet inside of your packaging, the coordinating stencil, and coordinating die. With the coordinating stencil, which is what I'm going to be starting out with today, there are some etched lines to give you separation in your ink blending and which flowers you can ink blend. So, for instance, these top two flowers, or the top area of the stencil, will give you these two flowers. And then if you shift your stencil, you're going to get the other three flowers. So, this does give you some options in changing up your colors between flowers, but I'm going to make them all the same color. I'm going to start with a piece of white cardstock cut to 5.5 by 8.5 and placing it down so it is tucked into the corner of my stamp wheel 2.0. Then I'm going to line up my images. I have the bouquet of flowers at the bottom and the basket at the top, and I'm going to pick those up with the top plate of my stamp wheel, flip that over, and do make sure you condition your stamps if it's brand new so you can use a conditioning eraser or your hand just by rubbing over it. And then I'm going to ink up the images using limestone ink, which is part of the Rock Collection Fresh Dye inks. When I'm done stamping, I'm going to be sure to leave my stamps in place because I like to do my stamping in a light gray color, ink blend, and then stamp it back over the top with a black ink later on. I'm going to then take my cardstock and place it onto a 9 by 12 sticky mat. And I'm lining up the first layer of the stencil, which is going to be just those two flowers. I am using some low tack tape to mask off the top portion just so I don't get any excess ink outside of my stencil. For my ink blending, I am going to be using the Red Sunset collection. So I'm starting out with the lightest color in that collection, and that is blush, using a small blending brush to just lightly apply some color. Once I remove the stencil, I am going to shift that down to the bottom area of the stencil, and it's going to color in those other three remaining flowers. Now, because my cardstock is quite large and the stencil is smaller, it's not quite sticking to the sticky mat because there's not a lot of excess hanging over the side. So I just like to use a low tack tape to hold that in place. Then I'm going to bring in the third layer of the stencil. This is going to add some details. There's also a flower down there. You can see I'm kind of masking off with my Post-it tape because it's not quite lined up. We will need to shift our stencil to line that one up. I'm going to use the color Rouge, which is still part of the Red Sunset collection, and a micro blending brush to apply that ink. Now, when I do this, I do go over the entire area lightly and then kind of come in either maybe in the center or around the edges just to kind of give it more of a scattered look instead of completely layered over the top. I did shift the stencil, remove my mask, and blend in to add that layer to the last flower. The next layer of the stencil is adding even more detail to our flowers. So I just shifted my stencil so that it lines up. And for this one, I am using crimson ink and again with a micro blending brush. So kind of going in a little light handed and then adding the darker areas to just one side. My flowers are all colored in, so I will work on the leaves next. This one is going to color in the entire area of the stencil. So for this, I'm using mint chalk, and this comes from the Aqua Island collection. I'm using a micro blending brush for this, kind of starting off towards the flower petals. And then as I get towards the edge or the outside edge of the leaves, I kind of go a little light handed. Then I'm still going to bring in Pool. Now, this is still the first layer of the stencil, just adding Pool closest to the flower petals because the way I look at it, the flower petals would be casting a bit of a shadow there. For the center pieces, which are also on that layer of the stencil, I am using Lemonade Stand, which is from the Citrus Punch collection. Our next layer of the stencil, which I just shifted down to get to that area, is adding detail to the leaves. That one I came in again with that micro blending brush and Pool ink And then still leaving that layer of the stencil in place, I'm going to add a little bit more definition or some shadow area using Mystic Lake. We do have one more layer to the leaves stencil, so I'm going to remove this one, add the next layer to give it even more of a detailed look to the leaves. Again, using the Mystic Lake, except applying it with a little bit of a heavier hand. Varying the pressure on your blending brush can really change up how your stencil looks. Now that my flower set is done, I can work on the basket, which I think is a really great addition to the set. So I am starting with a small blending brush and using hazelnut. This comes from the Delectable Delights collection. So I'm going to add that over the entire open area of the stencil. And then I'm going to come in with almond butter and a micro blending brush and add a little bit of that darker shade around the edges. The second layer of the stencil for our basket, I placed over the top, and I'm going to come in with that same almond butter. Again, going to use a small blending brush for this because the small blending brushes really do help kind of control your ink, but also does cover a fair amount of the stencil. Then I'm going to step up the shading once again using a micro brush and milk chocolate ink. So it's another shade darker, adding that shading around the edges. So it's going to give kind of a highlight in the center of our basket. And the next layer of the stencil is for the inside of the basket, starting out with the milk chocolate, really adding that so it's going to kind of give me that shadow area. You don't have to be real precise because you're most likely going to cover that up with your flowers. Now you can leave it just like this without that black outline because I think it does give it a nice whimsical look. But I'm going to add my black outline back in. So I tucked my cardstock down into that bottom left-hand corner once again. I'm going to ink up my images using the obsidian ink, flip my plate and stamp this back down. So again, you can go with or without that black outline. Leaving it with the gray outline kind of gives it a no line coloring look, a little more artistic. Adding the black outline in really makes everything pop to the forefront. I'm going to cut my cardstock in half just to make it easier to die cut out the images, and the coordinating dies cut pretty close to the images. So here is my trick that works every time. I used some scrap cardstock and I ran that through with the coordinating dies just on their own. I am using the negative piece, so it has that opening there. I line the opening up with my stenciled image, tape that down with satin masking tape, and then I'm going to bring in the coordinating die and it's going to pop in place and you'll feel it kind of pop right down in there. Again, I'll hold that down with some more tape, making sure that I am not taping on my image. I'm holding it down with the edges of the die and that scrap cardstock. So once I remove all of this, it's die cutting out my image perfectly. I get a perfect line all the way around the image, nice, even white space. So if you ever struggle lining up your coordinating dies or they may be cut really close to the image, give this a try by die cutting first from scrap cardstock, placing the negative piece over the image, and then popping your coordinating die in place. It may take an additional step and a little bit more time to create the card, but it is absolutely worth it in the end. For the background for my card project, I'm taking a piece of white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and using the rouge ink and a large blending brush, I'm going to ink blend in that top right hand corner. This is actually going to be flipped and be my bottom left hand, but this is how I like to ink blend. This is what's comfortable for me. And then I'm going to take the Cascading Elegance stencil and I am just loosely placing this over the top. It would probably be best to secure this down with some tape, but I just wanted to have some subtle texture to the background, a subtle look, and it's going to give me kind of that tone on tone color and have it fade off into that top corner. I'll then move on to working on a sentiment. I'm going to do some heat embossing. So I conditioned my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool. And the sentiment I'm using is from the Build a Garden Tranquil Trail. I started by inking it up with the antique gold pigment ink, gently pressing. You don't want to press too hard and distort your letters. And then I'm going to sprinkle on the antique gold embossing powder. And I love when I have a pigment ink that matches pretty close to my embossing powder because once I am heat setting it, I feel like it just helps fill in any gaps and just gives it more of a finished and polished look. Once that heat embossing is cooled, I line up the coordinating die and run that through the die cut machine. And I also die cut it 2 more times from white cardstock. I like to stack my die cuts, especially when they have some really thin areas or small scripty fonts. This works really well versus using any foam tape or foam squares. Before I attach anything to the front of my card, I did want to add some gold splatters. This is using the metallic watercolor set and a paintbrush. I just mixed a little bit of that metallic watercolor with a couple drops of water, flicked that onto the background. The gold is going to tie in nicely with my sentiment. I'm using my scoreboard to score a cardstock panel. So this is going to be a 4¼ by 5½ inch side folding card base. I added my tape runner to the top of that, and then I'm going to line up my panel so it fits perfectly and flush with the edges. I'll then take my basket. I'm going to attach the basket down to the cardstock without any layering. I want my flowers to be popped up, so I just used a tape runner to add the basket to the front of the panel down in that bottom left-hand corner. And for the flowers, I am popping that up with some foam tape. And for the arrangement of my flowers, I kind of liked them tilted like this. So it's almost like the flowers are kind of tumbling out of the basket and just adds some movement to my card front and also goes along with the flow of my ink blending. I then added the sentiment using some liquid glue up in that top corner. So that finishes off the card project. I hope these tips help you in your card making, especially if you have some tricky dies that you have a hard time lining up. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next month.
Wait, we have more where that came from. If you're after fabulous card making tutorials, you are definitely in the right spot. Our amazing design team create and upload fabulous video tutorials right to this YouTube channel. If you don't want to miss another amazing crafting tutorial, don't forget to subscribe and click that fun red button that you can see. Let's become paper crafting experts together.